Welcome back to the Dirt Show. Just before we got on the air, Harvard released a series of reports on anti Semitism, anti Zionism, anti Israel attitudes on college campuses, along with a report on Islamophobia and anti Muslim and anti Palestinian. To its credit, it acknowledged that it had done a terrible job in stemming the anti-Semitism in classrooms. It went through even what some teachers teach. Teachers teach that there was never a Jewish presence in what is today Israel, that the temple never existed there. In other words, that Jesus never existed, because without the temple, there is no Jesus. Without the moneylenders, without the Sanhedrin, without any of that, the whole Christianity doesn't exist. But professors, assistant professors, untenured professors, people calling themselves professors, were teaching that there was never any Jewish presence anywhere, notwithstanding archaeology. They say, oh, Israel buried all these things recently in order to claim that there was a Jewish presence. You find coins. I found coins. I own coins that were found beneath what would be the Holy Temple in Israel. There were two temples in Israel. The whole story of Judea and the Maccabees and you name it. These professors, they're Holocaust deniers, except it's not the Holocaust. What they're denying is the Jewish presence. They're just rewriting history, and they're teaching. They're teaching at Harvard. Your children are paying fortunes of money to be miseducated. But in order to make sure that there's no claim, oh my God, of unfairness, they also issued a report on Islamophobia. Let me tell you, there's no Islamophobia at Harvard University. Muslims at Harvard University, Arabs, pro-Palestinians, are regarded as heroes. Oh, you can get some idiot somewhere putting up a sign or saying something, but Islamophobia is not a problem at Harvard. Anti-Palestinian views are not a problem at Harvard. Anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, anti-Christianity, anti-conservatism, those are problems at Harvard. Anti-Muslim, anti-Arab, anti-Palestinian, not a problem at Harvard. If there were as little anti-Israel, anti-Zionist attitudes at Harvard as there is anti-Islamic, anti-Palestinian, nobody would even have mentioned it. But obviously, it's disproportionate. And the amount of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism and overt hatred toward Jews is so much greater. I'm not saying it's not 10 times greater. It's not 100 times greater. It's infinitely greater. You can't even measure it, because the base about anti-Muslim, anti-Islam is zero. And so anything on the other side is astronomically different. So the report just came out. One of them's 200 pages. One of them's, 100 pages. I will read them both with great care. I read the Wall Street Journal article about them, the New York Times, and I've heard about them, heard it was coming. I know Alan Garber, the president of Harvard, is a very decent man. I will read the reports with great interest. I'm writing a book on it, about halfway through. My newest book, which will be about Harvard and other universities and its conflict with President Trump over defunding, tentative title, Defend or Defund, or something like that. I'm going to make the arguments both for defending universities for some things and defunding them for others. You should defend their cancer research grants and defund their political grants. So that's my newest book that I'm working on. As soon as the show is over, I'll go back to my pad and pencil. I write everything by hand, and I will be sending my secretary my handwritten scribbles, and she will turn them into a manuscript. And within a few weeks, hopefully, there'll be another book, my 57th. So working very, very hard on that. All right, today's an anniversary, 100 days of the presidency of Donald Trump. Look, the thing I hated most about my 50 years of teaching at Harvard, hated grading. I just hated grading. In the undergraduate school, Professors don't grade. They have graders, students, graduate students who do the grading. Law school, everybody grades every single paper by hand. Every single paper has to be read, critiqued, and graded. I hated that. I didn't mind the reading of the papers. They were interesting. I didn't mind evaluating the students and writing, recommendations. I hated having to give that grade, A minus, B plus. When I first started, there were numbers. That is, uh, the highest number you could get was like 85. I think Brandeis had gotten 85s. And so if you got an 81, you were a genius. If you got a 79, you were probably on law review. And then it moved from numerical grading, which I favored, to alphabetical grading, A, B, C, D. Then it moved to pass, high pass, and fail. And that was a movement toward ending grading, which is the movement that we're seeing all over universities today, the end of meritocracy, the end of judging people based on their ability and introducing other reasons for evaluating people. But I always hated grading. But today I'm going to give grades. I'm going to give President Trump some grades, and he can appeal them. He can criticize them, and so could you. So let me go over some of the elements of the first 100 years. Let me start with the best. Um, President Trump ran on a promise to close the southern border and to prevent the thousands, millions of illegal immigrants from coming across the border. No president in history has ever done a better job or kept his promise more thoroughly than President Trump on that. So he's off the chart on that. If A plus is the highest grade that you can give somebody, he gets an A plus plus. I mean, he is better than an A plus on that. The numbers of people who have illegally come across the border, particularly the number of bad people who have illegally come across the border, has gone down to statistically zero. Well, sure, there are a few that sneak in, but if you look at the numbers, and we're not talking about the numbers issued by the White House, we're talking about numbers done by anybody who's objectively studying it. You see that the southern border has essentially been sealed. No, there'll be a guy crossing over sometime. There'll be somebody who'll drown in the Rio Grande. There'll be, there's obviously always going to be a situation. Look, as long as America is the greatest country in the world, the greatest country in the history of the world, there are going to be people who want to come here. More people want to come to America than to any other country, and fewer people want to leave America than any other country. It's a great credit to our nation as to why we have an immigration problem. A lot of countries in the world don't have immigration problems. Nobody wants to come, and everybody wants to leave. Remember when I was a lawyer for Soviet dissidents, everybody in the Soviet Union wanted to leave, and I never knew anybody who wanted to go to the Soviet Union. So, in fact, there was always this funny story. I was a lawyer for Sharansky and for others, and I had to hire Russian lawyers to help me in the cases. And first lawyer I hired was a woman named Dina Kamenskaya. And as soon as I hired her to be one of Sharansky's lawyers, she got what she had been trying to get for the last 10 years, an exit visa, because they wanted to throw her out of the country because they didn't want her to work with me. So it became famous. If you want to get an exit visa from the Soviet Union, work for Dershowitz, and he'll get you an exit visa. So, but people wanted to leave the Soviet Union. Nobody wanted to come into the Soviet Union, the opposite of the United States. And so Trump gets a 100% score. He would break Brandeis's record for an 85 on that one issue, of sealing the southern border. You have to give him congratulations. He promised he would do it. He did it. And even the Democrats, they won't, but they have to give him some credit for that. And there's no due process violations there because nobody has the right to sneak over the border. People have the right to try to become immigrants through legal processes, but nobody has the right to sneak over the border. So he gets a perfect score on that. Deportation is a little bit more complicated. The numbers of people that have been deported are lower than in the Biden or Obama administration. But remember that President Trump did not promise to deport all illegal aliens. He knows that there are many illegal aliens that are doing good things for the United States. They work hard in the service industries. They work hard in the agricultural industry and the hotel industry. I know, because I live on Martha's Vineyard, where there are a lot of immigrants. I don't know who's illegal and who's legal. Lots of immigrants who work very hard as gardeners, as other professionals, and other helpers. So we know that. So what President Trump promised was he'd get rid of the worst first, the gang members, the killers, the rapists, and hard to know how many of those he's gotten rid of and what percentage he's gotten rid of. You can't count that in numbers. So I have to say incomplete. My grade for immigration is an incomplete. We don't know enough. I think he gets an E for effort. His heart's in the right place, and the constitutional issues are very difficult, and we'll get to that in a minute, because the other grade I would give him is rule of law. He has been, obviously subject to all kinds of lawfare by dozens of judges and many litigants who are challenging everything he's doing, particularly in the deportation area. That's one of the most uncertain areas of law. Nobody really knows what the law is, particularly what due process means for visa holders, for illegal immigrants, and even for green card holders if they obtain their green card through fraudulent methods. So the rule of law issue is a challenging one and a difficult one, and he has pressed the envelope very hard, and he's pushed the envelope, much like previous presidents, President Jefferson, President Lincoln, President Roosevelt, all pushed the envelope very hard, particularly against the judiciary, and the judiciary fought back, and we got a lot of decisions, some good decisions, some bad decisions, as the result of that conflict. We are not in a constitutional crisis. We are in a constitutional conflict, and the conflict is being worked out through the Constitution. And so on the rule of law, I think I have to give him a pretty good grade, somewhere between a B plus and an A minus. Not perfect. There are things he could have done, I think, a little bit more smoothly. And I think there are ways, by the way, of dealing with these deportation issues that are creative. Look, God invented Zoom so that we don't have to always litigate every case in a physical courtroom. And I would think that one solution to the problem of due process and immigration would be to open up the American embassies everywhere in the world to people who have been deported and who claim they have been deported improperly, and let them argue their case in front of a judge who's sitting in the United States. They can argue the case on Zoom. They can have their lawyer on Zoom, and you can have a resolution of it without literally bringing them back to the United States. So I think the Supreme Court made a mistake when it talked about this guy from Georgia who the United States had to facilitate his return to the United States. No, all they should have had to do was facilitate his ability to get a hearing in front of an immigration judge who can then determine whether El Salvador is an appropriate place for a person to be deported, or Guatemala or Nicaragua or Brazil or Argentina or Mexico. So there are a lot of creative solutions that could be worked on. I don't think the administration has been creative enough in this area, and that's why I'm giving them a minus B plus rather than the A plus that they got for deportation. All right, next is the economy. I have to tell you, that's not my area of expertise. Don't ask me to give you a lecture on the impact of tariffs on both short-term and long-term economy. Obviously, there's a division of expertise on this. And everybody seems to agree that in the short term, the tariffs have caused a rise in prices. Trump says that in the long term, they'll result in a reduction in prices. Time will tell. I can't give an evaluation or a real judgment on the economy. The people have taken a judgment. They have said they don't like it. His poll numbers are way down on the economy, but that could reflect the short-term impact on the economy for what the president has done immediately on tariffs. So we don't know. We saw that Bezos and Amazon weighed in on that. The president spoke to them. It's a work in progress. So I'm not gonna give a final grade. I'll give a tentative grade, but not a final grade. And the tentative grade would probably be a B on the economy. Now, to me, the most dangerous aspect of the first 100 days has been foreign policy. Let's talk about first the major failure on foreign policy, Canada. Yesterday, today, the Canadian people changed their votes because of Trump. Trump had a decisive impact on the election and an impact for the worse. An impact worse for America, worse for the world, worse for peace, worse for the economy, worse for Israel, worse for almost everything, as far as I can tell. Um, the conservative candidate, who was very good, was way ahead in the polls, 25 points ahead in the polls. It was going to be not even a race. The conservative candidate was going to win, the liberal candidate was going to lose. And then President Trump interfered and said, I want Canada to be a state. Does he really mean it? I don't know. Tariffs, you name it, fentanyl on the border, wasn't very much of that. But his involvement in trying to influence Canadian policy resulted in the most dramatic shift of voters in any democracy in modern history. I can't think of any situation where voters changed so dramatically from 25% in favor to 5 to 10% against. There's going to be a minority government. He didn't get a majority, but he's going to form a government with other liberal left-wing people. It will be bad for America. It'll be bad for the world. So that was a foreign policy failure. He gets an F on that one. Canada, he gets an F. Sorry. I don't see any alternative. Please write to me and tell me if you're a Canadian or if you're American, why he deserves better than an F. Why should he have intruded on an election that was going to help the United States, going to help the world, going to help the economy? Why should he have intruded and turned the election around and turned it against the interests of the United States? So I don't see any justification for that. Russia, we don't know. Again, it's a work in progress. A few days ago, it looked like the president was siding with Russia against Ukraine, that disastrous meeting in the Oval Office, partly Zelensky's fault. And then suddenly, after the Russians attacked Kiev, and during negotiations, the president turns on a dime and says, well, maybe Putin doesn't want peace. So I think we're seeing a lot of uncertainty. Will there be a resolution? Don't know. But if there is a resolution in Ukraine, it will be a Chamberlain type resolution, not a Churchill type resolution. It will be a resolution that allows the Russians to hold on to Crimea. Maybe it won't involve American recognition of Russian holding on to Crimea, but it will be a defeat not only for Ukraine, but it will be a defeat for the principle that you don't reward aggression. So don't know where Russia is going. Time will tell. He may end up with an A+. If he does bring about a cessation of hostilities and in a way that doesn't encourage Russia to move on to other areas and assures the security of Ukraine against further encroachments, maybe he'll get an A. Iran, don't know. Obviously, the president likes deals. He wants to make a deal in Russia. Maybe he will. And he'd like to make a deal with Iran. I do not believe there's a deal to be made with Iran. We tried. I wrote a book about it, how bad the initial deal was with Iran. I pushed very hard for President Trump to undo that deal, which he did. I was in favor definitely of the deal not having been made. I was a little bit more ambivalent as to whether it should be undone. But in any event, it was undone. And now it looks like he may be going back and making a deal which doesn't assure that Iran will not get a bomb. You have to start out with one assumption: Iran cheats. You can't believe a word it says. It said that it wasn't trying to develop nuclear bombs. It was only trying to heat homes by nuclear heating. It's a warm place. You don't need nuclear energy to warm Iran. And we know that he said that the Iranians have said they weren't trying to develop a bomb, and the Israelis discovered material and turned it over to the UN and to the United States, proving conclusively that when Iran said it wasn't trying to develop a bomb, it was trying to develop a bomb and a delivery system and rockets and all of that. So for me, there's only two solutions. One, the Libyan solution, that is a deal under which Iran agrees to dismantle its entire nuclear program under the supervision of the United States, with some intelligence provided by Israel, with an absolute guarantee like Libya, it could not develop nuclear weapons. All right, that's a deal. That's an acceptable deal. And if Trump brings about that deal, he gets a Nobel Peace Prize. Now, he won't get the Nobel Peace Prize. It doesn't matter. He can bring about peace in the world. The Nobel Committee is not going to give it to him. It's going to give it to some crazy lunatic who, makes all kinds of. It'll give it to Yasser Arafat. That's who got the Nobel Peace Prize. So the Nobel Peace Prize is a worthless piece of junk. But it's not going to go to Donald Trump because he's Donald Trump. It doesn't matter what he does. He'll never get the Nobel Peace Prize. He should have gotten it for the Abraham Accords, and he didn't. So if there's a deal, it has to be the Libyan deal. If it's anything short of that, then I think Israel may have to take its own action and assure its own survival by destroying Iran's ability to develop nuclear weapons. So on Iran, again, incomplete at the moment, no better than a B plus. On balance, first 100 days, let me give a little bit more of an overview. No 100 days in American history has been more energetic than the first 100 days of the Trump administration. He has shown more energy, more innovation, more personal involvement than any president in history, as far as I can tell, even more than Jefferson and Lincoln. I mean, he's on television every day. He's giving press conferences, answering questions. He's having executive orders signed, some of them good, some of them not so good. He's pushing legislation, big, beautiful laws. Whatever you might think, it puts the lie to the Democrats who were saying, oh, he's almost 80 years old. He's just like Joe Biden. He's really not competent to be president. That's absurd. He is the most energized president in my lifetime. And hopefully he'll continue to be energetic. So you have to give him an A++ for energy. You have to give him an A++ on border security. And then, you can argue about some of the other issues. But these have been very interesting 100 days, very, very interesting 100 days, a lot more interesting than we would have had from Kamala Harris or Joe Biden. So for better or worse, this is a president who's having a big impact, and he will continue to have a big impact. And we'll see how the conflicts between the judiciary and the executive are worked out. One area that hasn't really played a role has been legislative. Remember, we have a tripartite system of government. Legislature has been relatively silent. It's been a battle between the judiciary and the executive, and I suspect we'll see the legislature play a greater role as we come closer to the midterm elections. Okay, let's go to letters now and see what we have. Okay, this relates to what I've just said. Professor, if Trump, for whatever reason, does not give the go-ahead for Israel to take out Iran's nuclear capabilities, do you think Netanyahu would do so on his own? It would be the hardest decision an Israeli prime minister ever had to make. Look, Menachem Begin disregarded the president of the United States and went ahead and bombed the Osiris reactor. The United States condemned them, voted to condemn them at the United Nations, and then years later, the United States congratulated them when they went into Iraq, and there were no nuclear weapons. The United States appreciated what Begin had done. Ehud Olmert also disregarded President Bush, who he was very close to. They were good friends. And Olmert said, look, you're the president of the United States. I'm the prime minister of Israel. I have to make the decision that is best for my country. And he went ahead and he bombed the Syrian nuclear reactor. Trump is different because if you violate Trump's commands, you will pay a price, as Zelensky learned. And I think Netanyahu is very smart. He knows Trump. He likes Trump. They have a lot of similarities in some ways, a lot of differences. And I don't know whether he would violate an express order by Trump. I don't know whether Trump would give an express order. Trump, there are 3 or 4 ways in which the United States could participate or not participate in an attack on Iran. One, it could fully participate, given the planes that have the 30-ton bombs and all of that. Second, it could lend it to them. Third, it could just help facilitate an attack by Israel without any American Air Force being involved. Fourth, it could just prevent Iran from responding by shooting down missiles from Iran. All of these things are possible. Or it could do nothing. It could do nothing. It could say, look, you're on your own. You disregarded what the president has said, and we're not going to help you in any way. Don't know what would happen, but it's a work in progress, and it's the hardest decision that any Israel prime minister will have to make. Your Churchill comment is very true. Had even a weak military of the United Kingdom and France stood up to Hitler at the time, well, remember what I said. I said if a Churchill had been the prime minister of England in the 1930s and had gone and tried to destroy and successfully destroyed the German army, the British and the French would have been condemned for starting a war, but they would have saved 50 million lives. And that may be the fate that Netanyahu will have to encounter. He may have to do something extraordinarily unpopular, and we'll never know whether he saved lives or not, because the one thing about history is it's blind to the future. It never knows what was prevented or wasn't prevented. I've been worried about universities not accepting Jewish students who apply to them, especially those Jewish students who have a Jewish last name. Hey, I know that situation. Is there a way to determine if this is happening since October 7th? It is. Harvard used to, when I was there, it was about 23% Jewish, based on meritocracy. And now it's below 10%, which is the lowest it's been since President Lowell imposed a quota against Jews in the early 20th century. So there's no question that there are fewer Jews in elite major universities, many more in the South now. Colleges like Emory and Elon College and Vanderbilt have had an increase in the number of Jewish applicants. Northwestern, Northeastern, WashU have all had increases in Jewish students. So we'll see what happens, how that plays out. This is an interesting letter. One of my ancestors got himself in hot water with the Continental Army because he advocated Yale University be kept open during the American Revolution. Yale was a hotbed of Tory sympathy. So was Harvard. In fact, for years I lived right off Brattle Street. Brattle Street has another name. It's called Brattle Street now, but it was called Tory Road because it was the place that rich people lived. And many of the rich people who lived in Cambridge supported the British and did not want America to separate from Britain. They were called the Tories. New Haven had its Tories, and when I lived in New Haven, was a student at Yale. I also lived on Whaley Avenue, which was named after a Tory. So both Yale and Harvard have histories of having been opposed to the American Revolution because they had as their component elements mostly very wealthy and very religious, and many of them were anti-revolution. And so it's interesting, the history of Harvard and Yale. This is interesting. After reviewing some of the documents in the Garcia case, I saw that the immigration judge that gave him the withholding was for Guatemala, not Salvador. That's interesting. I've read the same thing. But he did say, or she did say, whatever, that he had to stay in the United States. But as I said, there's a way of resolving this. Just have a hearing at the American Embassy, have a full due process hearing, have his lawyer present through Zoom, and we can decide whether or not he is eligible for return to the United States or not. There are sensible ways of resolving these issues, and I think often extremes clash and unnecessarily. So let's see if we can resolve some of these issues within due process, but in a reasonable way. I'm looking forward to seeing you all tomorrow.